Welcome everyone to this somewhat holiday edition of the
Somewhat.
Regeneration podcast. I was just explaining to my compadres here about recent travels to see my father kind of pre-Thanksgiving up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, literally in the middle of nowhere. I'm going to make a case it might be this. How would we categorize an airport that's tied into that system? Like we have a regional airport around us.
Small. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, but that I don't think they go. Maybe it's just used for local planes, but this was a tiny, tiny airport that had the whole in miniature, the whole idea of getting, you know, frisks and metal detected and that whole world. And when you enter it and you go into Chicago, you're in that world. And that struck me as interesting yesterday. You know,
A
Mm.
Uper world.
yeah, where these guys are working 3 hours a day, but the whole team shows up just to get one flight out and one
Oh,
flight in. No,
got a plane coming in, eh?
no, no, really cool.
It's like Northern Exposure, right?
Yeah. And well, welcome everybody to the Regeneration Podcast. It's been a while again. I had my own illness, and I was running a men's conference for the diocese, which was really interesting. We had I invited the abbot of the Abbey of the Genesee. People have heard me talk about him a lot, and he talked. Um, Somebody could say I don't know if he mentioned the word God during the whole talk.
Oh.
Um, and he talked about desire, and he talked
Like the
about
book,
hope.
like the Song of Songs.
Yeah, in one sense, he was talking about what it means to be human. Again, at the monastery, uh, the beautiful complement to, and we might in this conversation talk about, this new awakening of Christianity and how podcasters use the word the Bible and God and Jesus Christ is King. But the wonderful compliment at the monastery is if we have a savior who's fully human, fully divine, they have to give equal measure to the fully human. They're living with people who are Catholic, and I know I've said this before, but that's about all they have in common. Philip, you're from kind of the welcoming back to the show, Philip Balboni. I think our listeners
Thank you.
remember him. But on that measure, I think I'm going to see my brother-in-law this weekend, Chris, who lives in the Catskills now, but lived for a long time in New York City. And this, I don't know if it's an exaggeration, but we all have stories of getting at things. But when I worked at the monastery, I would go visit my brother-in-law down in New York City. They lived in Mulberry Street, the one remaining street of Mulberry Street, which was like Little Italy, now mostly Chinatown. But we'd go out with actor friends. And if they heard I worked for the church, that was very quaint. Like, oh, it's really cute. And and that was also like the notion of diversity when you live in upstate New York, diversity. But and this point has been made, I'm sure, by many people. But you could go to those parties. You could live in New York City. You spin the color wheel, and it's gray when you spin it so fast. But also, you can spend your whole life never really having a conversation with somebody who disagrees with you. So it's what my deceased literary hero called
What, they don't have families?
well, yeah, right. No, but they self-select for friends who are an echo chamber. That, for
They
one
must not
thing,
be
living out
married.
in the country and also in a monastery, these guys that they're Catholic is about the only thing they have in common. They have to live to learn to live in close proximity with people they may not like temperamentally, but they hang in there until they see that everybody is kind of made in the image of God. And you learn about yourself that this guy was made different than I am. Like I might run from, I'm very low on like organization and things like that. I might run from people like that, but in the monastery, they learn to get along with people. And and then their eyes, it's another form of being red pilled. Their eyes awaken to how shallow their world was when they can find somebody that they thought was a rat bastard was just made differently than them, completely different temperament. They cared about things, they saw things in a different way. And consequently, a lot of these guys turn into men, for that reason. That they know that they didn't hang the stars in their courses and the world is made up of different people. And I swear that's a huge aspect of monastic life. So at this men's
Oh.
conference again, the talk didn't have much religious jargon. It was on desire and acedia, the noonday demon. What do you do when you're sitting around, especially in monasteries, and you get all squirmy, and it can be equated with depression, but it's different.
Hmm.
And it was very, very human. And I was proud to say that in our church, which is divided between like the rad trads and the libtards, as I say, this type of language, you could get some people who, would be quick if something was high highly intellectual, say like, I didn't understand anything and be angry. But some people said, wow, this was new to me. I'm not so sure I picked up on too much, but everybody to a T, guys who had been to the men's conference for 20 years, which was mostly by an athlete who would say like, I'm so glad I'm Catholic. The Eucharist kicks ass. They all found this intriguing, almost to a person.
Nice.
Yeah. Philip Balboni, it might even connect.
Can you hear me?
You never
Oh,
I
know.
can.
Yeah.
When you weren't able to come on last time, you had a sickness
yeah,
in
I'm
your
sorry.
family. No, no,
Yeah.
no. But you had framed a question that I was thinking about this morning, knowing that we were getting together. But you have a good background in academia, and I think you think like an anthropologist. But you wondered about the puzzling or maybe this new phenomenon where, and you frame it how you would frame it, but where many, many people in this country, we'll use this, aren't thinking, wow, the government doesn't care about me. They're thinking that my government or aspects of it is actually looking to hurt me in some way. Now, say the question the way, or the statement the way you frame it, then talk about why this interests you so much right now.
Um, well, I think one personal sort of inroad to it is having studied, which doesn't necessarily mean the same thing as learned, but having studied colonialism and imperialism most of my time in academia, you sort of come into contact with with theories, but more powerfully with, testimony from, people, historical people or contemporary people, who have lived under colonial regimes, who have come to understand them not just as sort of an occupying force that, is imposing a foreign administration, even for the benefit of the metropole, but is actively putting in effect policies, to hurt, to kill, to destroy either the body or the mind, the soul of the colonized population. And so within sort of context of sort of thinking about historical colonialism, which of course, I don't get behind the idea that, every single British administrator who went to India wanted to hurt Indians. I mean,
Right.
that's absurd. But, on the whole, we have,
But
you know,
Britain did. Yeah.
but Britain did. And
Yeah.
but Britain did. And however we want to identify Britain, do we want to call it the monarchy? Do we want to call it the aristocracy? Do we want to call it the elite? Do we want to call it the Bank of England or the City of London? That's another question of what
I
is
call
Britain.
it them bastards. That's what I
Them
prefer.
bastards, yeah, yeah. Um, but them bastards did either because they wanted to hurt Indians because they liked hurting Indians, but more likely and more usually not necessarily for purely sadistic reasons, but because, well, they wanted XYZ, and the way to do that went through a path of, causing harm to the population.
And let's face it, it worked on the Irish.
Yeah, it did. I mean, thank God it didn't seem to have, broken their souls totally. But yeah, it did. And
No,
I
the
think
Irish will do that on their own. Thank you.
yeah. Um, but yeah, I think in this sort of context of colonialism, we can sort of think about a relationship between the government, however we want to understand the government, and that's another conversation, and the people, which is not necessarily one of, if we want to think about it in negative terms, corruption. Like, oh, my government is dysfunctional. They're idiots, or they're corrupt. They're bad bureaucrats. No, my government or elements within it are not just corrupt. They're not just ineffectual. They're not just stupid. They are malicious, or at least elements within them that are making decisions are viewing me as a subject of the government in a malicious way, in a way that seeks to harm me for some purpose or cause. And I think that kind of idea, which again I think is more, you see it a lot, understandably, in the history of colonialism and imperialism. I'm sure that has existed in the American context for a very long time. In fact, I know it has. But I feel like we see it more and more, where the understanding of the state, the government, however we want to define it, is increasingly seen as a relationship of the colonized to the colonizer. and a colonizer who is not a kind of a colonizer in the maybe the ancient sense of, okay, we're going to come in, you can do whatever you like, pay us taxes, pay us tribute, and a certain degree of autonomy. We're not going to go in there and try to
Right.
restructure your soul. But a sort of a modern form of colonialism, imperialism, which is like, we're not just going to go in there to get money from you, to get taxation. We are going to do something to your consciousness, to your soul, to
Yeah.
your body, for the sake of some sort of policies,
Yeah.
plans that can be sort of malicious. And I
It's
think this is,
interesting, when you mention that, because with the ancient Greeks and Romans in their conquest of empire, they didn't care what people did usually, as long as they paid their taxes, right? Do
yeah,
your thing, right? We're not trying to assimilate anybody. They would assimilate anyway, like, but it was not a project, at least as far as my reading of history goes, it was not like we have seen with British colonialism, for instance,
hmm yeah,
right? Which was which is an interesting phenomenon, right? If you think about it. And let me ask you this too before, as you run this thread out, because when you were talking, I can't help but think that that colonialist project, kind of like the CIA, right? They used to be allowed to work, they were supposed to only work on foreign governments and foreign
hmm
nations, and now they're in the American, they're domestic now.
yeah,
And it seems to me that that colonialist project has been kind of, not inverted or done something where now, you can't call it colonialism anymore, but now it's being turned on, actually, what we call the indigenous populations,
yeah,
and coming from wherever that happens to be, like you said, from the elites. Who the hell is this coming from? The World Economic Forum, where? But it
yeah,
seems like there's a kind of a reverse colonialism. I don't know what to even to call it, but this just seems really weird. And I think this is part of the problem of the last, I don't know, 5 or 6, 7 years, where
yeah.
people don't have a historical context to understand that.
Right, right.
Mhm.
And I think one term that um, might get invoked by someone sort of who has been trained in a more kind of normative anti-imperialist leftist milieu is a concept of the imperial boomerang, where the policies, and I would probably also say the mindsets that are developed and imposed through the colonization of the other inevitably get brought back and deployed upon the indigenous population of the
Hmm.
empire itself. So I think that that is a helpful concept in many ways. In some particular ways, I mean, we know, for instance, like in the context of I mean, not to go into sort of Israel Palestine, but we know that many of the U.S. police forces, many of them have trained in Israel and have
Totally.
brought back techniques and technologies that were developed there for use on Palestinians. And now those techniques, technologies, trainings are coming here, and now Americans are being increasingly subject to the same forms of surveillance, control, whatever,
Right.
that were developed in Israel. And so that's just one kind of
So
very
can we
yeah.
give an example? So years ago, maybe 10, 20 years ago, I remember reading something about traveling in Israel. So if say you're traveling in Israel and you fit kind of a profile, they'll pull you out and talk to you, right? Just to make sure you're not whatever. Um, but that happened here. Well, it must have been 30 years ago I read this, because that happened here with the advent of the TSA, right?
Hmm,
Everybody's a suspect now, right?
yeah.
And just was it the 2008 election? I think Rand Paul was running for president in the primary. And Rand Paul was running basically on an anti-surveillance state platform, which they ignored him
I would
because
agree that that was part of my
that
draw
was
to
his
him.
thing, right? Was
Yeah.
that
It
2012?
was
What year?
Ron Paul. It was Ron Paul, right?
No, it was Rand
Yeah.
Paul. I'm
Oh,
thinking
really?
Ron Paul
Okay.
certainly too, but
Yeah.
Rand Paul, because it was really ramping up then.
Mhm.
And even at that time, the New York Times was against surveillance.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Back when they were against Dick Cheney.
Yeah. See, my
Oh,
statement was so shocking it knocked Mike off the internet.
no, I'm here. It's just for some reason my camera fades
I
every so
knocked him
often.
out.
I
Sorry,
don't know
Mike.
what
Well,
could be caused.
hopefully it wasn't Big Brother,
That probably was.
flickering at us.
Bitches.
Yeah, I'm
Yep.
reporting from a different place, and even pre recording, I was talking to Michael. My camera would just kind of fade in and
Mm.
out, but I can hear the whole thing. Cool.
Oh.
Continue. Yeah.
Look, I'm done.
Uh,
Yeah.
no, but I think that I mean the PSA is a good, I mean this a good example of, I mean you look at, for instance, back in after 9/11, obviously there was the archetype stereotype of the of the dangerous Muslim, or rather the dangerous brown man, um, which went far beyond just Muslims themselves. One, because Muslims look like everything, and two, because they were pulling in Sikhs and
Yeah.
Hispanic people and whatever. Um, but then later on, now, I mean, of course, we still have the archetype of the dangerous Muslim man, but in addition to that, now there's the archetype of the dangerous young white guy,
Mhm.
the fundamentalist American, white. It's the same archetypal structure. It's just been expanded. It got developed around the figure of the scary brown Muslim. Once you develop that way of thinking, that form, it was pretty easy to expand it to say, okay, well now we're going to add into it certain kinds of white dudes,
Hmm.
who are seen as dangerous, threatening, potentially fundamentalist for these other ways. And then you can keep expanding that. You can keep adding sort of
Yeah.
new sort of archetypal variations to create new different images of, or
Well,
types
right.
of people.
Well, and
Yeah.
as we, speaking, hey, by the way, have either of you ever been on a watch list?
I don't
No.
know.
I have.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
Oh
So
wow, good for you.
they told me, now this happened years ago, when every time I had to fly, I had to go through some bullshit because I don't know, there was and they tell you the dumbest stuff too. Even last year I tried to buy a gun. I was buying an old, like a, was it a 50 caliber muzzle loader or something? It was really cool. Maybe a 60.
Mm.
It was really cool. It was old gun, but I had to do the FBI check. And they flagged me. Like, for what? I have no parking tickets or anything. And they said, when I tried to get to the bottom of it, which you cannot get to the bottom of it, and I just said I gave up a wait. I just I'll wait till there's a new administration and figure out what's going on. Is that they were telling me, well, you probably have the same name as somebody. Well, no shit. My name is as common as John Smith. I'm sure there's a Michael Martin in prison someplace.
Mm.
Uh, don't you have my social security number, my license number, none of that stuff's. But I didn't know, I didn't know what it was, but I was highly suspicious,
Mm.
and they make it almost impossible to get past it.
Well, I understand that. Are you? I mean, you're active obviously on. I don't know if you're on Twitter or X, but obviously I know you're on Substack. Are you on Twitter or X as well? Okay. I mean, I assume that at this point, they have um, scoured all of those platforms, using AI proprietary to, either Palantir or the government, whatever, and put together sort of informal watch lists for all of us. I mean, I'm sure I'm on some list just for the things that I've only had X for a couple months, but I'm sure I'm on some watch list just for the, people I follow and the stuff I've liked.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
Right.
that's good. Maybe it doesn't manifest
and that's what
in
Rand Paul was mad about, right?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And knowing, I mean, the amazing thing now is that it's kind of like, on the one hand, I feel like among a certain kind of liberal milieu, it's sort of like this attitude, which I also once sort of shared, honestly, um, to my shame, of, well, of course they're spying on everyone, but who cares?
I have
They're
nothing to
not going to,
hide.
yeah,
Yeah.
well, they're not going to come after you. I mean, so I think that's the attitude among, a certain kind of
Hmm.
segment of society, especially sort of a liberal, more upwardly mobile segment. But then among a lot of other people, the people who think the government is trying to hurt them, it's sort of like, well, it's another form of, not who cares, but yeah, no shit. The assumption is that
Hmm.
I am being, that I don't really have any. Increasingly, the default assumption is all these rights that I am told I have are to some degree fictitious, or they are becoming ever more fictitious. So what's so shocking about that? I mean, the very fact that kind of saying, well, I'm sure that based on stuff I like on social media, I'm on some list, go figure. It's sort of an amazing thing that even it doesn't garner very much shock.
So
No,
Um,
I know.
let's go back a little bit to um, this isn't like, what exactly constitutes the deep state. But, Michael was saying where some of this 9/11, started a lot of this. That, Guido would say it changed overnight. But and I'm not pinning it there, but one would be, if you're looking at Russian dolls, stories within stories, like Descartes again, right? Just looking at people through the lens of what Coleridge would call outness. That there's a world out there of things we manipulate, a worldview that Barfield called methodically fruitful but ontologically fictitious, right? And so, but like as much as you could give it a go, Philip, how because a big one for me would be size. Size that like when the scale of the political entity gets too big, you're necessarily leading to a panopticon of some sense. This
Time
whole
out.
go,
So yeah. So with this, I mean, as a way to set this up, set Philip's answer up.
please. Yeah.
So this had to be 2012. I think it was the re-election cycle with Obama going toward a second term. And a friend of mine who was not in the CIA, he swears he was not in the CIA ever, but he was in the Foreign Service. And he's super astute about politics and stuff. So he called me up one day and I was like, his name's Martin. And I said, yeah. I said, hey, what do you think about what's going on with all this stuff with whatever Obama was dealing with at the time? And he stopped right in my tracks and said, Michael, this is 2012. I just want you to know somebody from the government's probably listening to this. And I was like, yeah, yeah. Then the next day, my camera's out of focus here. It's
Yeah.
okay. And you don't need to see me in focus.
it
The
gives you a
next
certain
day,
aura.
the story dropped about William Binney. Do you know about him?
Yeah,
I
of
can't
course, yeah.
remember.
The guy he worked for the NSA. He was a whistleblower, and he said, no, they're taking up everybody's data. And they built this big center out in Utah or Idaho to house data. Now these data centers are going up everywhere.
Literally everywhere.
And people hear that, oh, data center, that's nice. What's the data they're storing? It's you, right? And they're even talking it's going to take so much electricity
Hmm.
to run these places.
And water too.
It's insane,
Yeah.
right? And people don't even think about it. They go, oh, data center, nice. It'll help the economy or whatever. I'm like,
Yeah.
stop. So, Philip, continue.
Uh-huh.
Well, but no, I think that that's a good. I mean, the data center thing is a good. I mean, the whole AI thing is a good entry point because on the one hand, there's been no rational, argument with evidence provided for why winning the AI race or doing any of these things actually will help the economy in the sense of helping the material conditions of a majority of Americans. There are arguments for why it might temporarily continue keeping the S&P 500 up or the Nasdaq, but there's no arguments for why this thing will actually help people. And there are a huge number of arguments for why this will cause, in potentially immeasurable harm, including ecological harm. You look at the chart of energy prices since ChatGPT went live. I mean, it's almost gone parabolic. It's almost gone straight up of what people in America are paying for energy. Now, there are more than one factor that goes into determining energy prices, but a big one is pretty evidently how much energy these AI platforms, data centers are sucking up because, it's supply and demand. Huge increase in demand, the prices are going to go up. Um, so, this, where I wanted to go with this is, something like these, AI policies. There's a if we presume that the people who are really pushing these AI policies with all the potentially cataclysmic effects that they might have on the majority of Americans, there are two options. Either the people who are really designing the policies are ignorant and they are ideological and they think, they are doing one thing, but actually doing another. And then we have one set of problems, to theorize and deal with. Other side, they know exactly what they're doing. They understand, at least at a certain level. I'm not talking about, a 45-year-old hotshot hedge fund manager who's fundamentally an idiot, but has made a lot of money and thinks that he's powerful, but actually is nowhere near the, actual centers of power. But the people who are really making, decisions about the future of the AI economy, if they do know all of these effects, if they do know what is being done and what will happen if they continue forward, then they're sort of confronted with a problem of evil and a question of how much imaginative power do we have for understanding what's going on?
Mm-hmm.
Because, if we go back to saying before about people thinking my government is trying to hurt me or kill me, if you look at, yeah, I mean, AI is one example, but there are so many examples of things that if you if your interpretation of them is that the people who are making these decisions are ignorant or they're greedy or they're ideological, things that sort of could affect everyone, that everyone has an experience of being greedy or being ideological or being naive or ignorant. That's one thing. But evidence continues to mount up with each of these examples that they can't, all these policies can't be made on the basis of pure stupidity. And if they're not, it opens up this question of evil, which I think is really something that, for instance, like the left, ironically, has an incredibly hard time grappling with, because from a leftist understanding, everything really reduces to greed. That, why are the AI, barons, overlords, oligarchs doing these things? Well, they're greedy. They want more money. Well, maybe, but that's kind of, that's a very one-dimensional analysis of human behavior and motivation. That, the reason that all these outcomes in the country are getting worse and worse is because some people are greedy. Surely they are, but that kind of halts the analysis and the thinking here when you really reflect on it and you realize truly that the horrendous, horrific consequences of many of these policies, especially if you're thinking in all of a kind of a theological register, you have to sort of open yourself up to, maybe there, at the very least, it is worth considering that there are other kinds of motivations, other kinds of forces that we need to be accounting for when we
Mm-hmm.
think about, what the hell is going on with AI and
So
everything.
let me ask you a question, Philip.
Yeah.
So, having lived a life, where, like I mentioned before, 30 years ago, people would have called Bonnie and me lefties because we were basically Catholic hippies. Um, but over the course of my life, people on the left used to be pro-worker, anti-government, anti-corporation, or at least super suspicious anyway. Anti, especially big pharma kinds of things, right? Um, even anti-Starbucks, which is like the emblematic corporate bloat, right?
Yeah.
Here's a $5 coffee. Yeah, it cost us 10 cents to make. Um, but some over the course of that time, and I think many people have noticed this, and I think it has contributed to the election of Donald Trump in the second time, is that the working class said, well, you guys abandon us in favor of bankers and tech bros. And these are the same people who are complaining about the tech bros now, but it seems to me that, and I know this from academia, those are the guys all in the pocket. They talk a good resistance game, but they're part of the establishment.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
happened? How did that happen?
Well, I mean, I think, well, maybe it's a good thing. I hope I'd probably get in trouble. I will get in trouble, I'm sure, if someone sees this. But,
That's right.
you know, I wonder,
That's not why I asked, but
no, 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 no. But I do,
just trying to make I'm just trying to make it as difficult a Thanksgiving for you as possible, Phil.
no, but I do think, I do wonder if some of it has to do with, there's this joke, there's a meme that, goes around sometimes that you see of like, I think there's like a cartoon of it's Occupy Wall Street. And, they're in some, the top of JP Morgan or something, and they're looking outside at the angry, hordes with the pitchforks. And, the CEO says, okay, it's time for identity politics. That,
Yeah.
I mean, and the reason that I think that potentially is true is it goes back to what we were saying before about what is Britain. You know, that in most conversations, I think in academia, or at least in conversations I was in academia about colonialism, there was this sort of easy semantic shift that we're talking about Britain, but then implicitly we're talking about all British people.
Mhm.
You know, we're talking about not just the state, we're also talking about, you know, the British guys, you know, working in the coal mines, you know, working
Mhm.
in Manchester in 1860. They're also part of the empire. They're also part of the agent, you know, which of course is absurd. You know, when you actually stop and reflect on it, that no, we can certainly talk about varying degrees of suffering, victimhood, and, you know, exploitation. But the idea that, you know, the majority of British society at the heyday of British Empire was benefiting from or had any real comprehension of what the empire was is an absurdity. And in
Mhm.
many cases, over time, they also suffered from it a lot. I mean, not wholly, but there obviously class differences were very important.
Mhm.
But I think the same thing is true, you know, has become true today in a lot of sort of left, you know, analyses that the problem is no the problem is no longer the relatively small group of people and institutions who are really making things run. It's this much larger um, entity that gets called sort of, you know, sometimes in colonial context, Western civilization or whiteness or patriarchy or, you know, whatever, which sort of lumps together a huge net of people, the vast majority of whom, one, have no real involvement in the structures of oppression and exploitation, and two, in so many cases, are also being victimized by it, even if to a lesser degree than other groups. I mean, no one is going to deny that, you know, poor Black people in this country, on the whole, have gotten a much rawer deal than poor, you know, than poor white people have. But at the same time, the majority of white people in the country are also, you know, suffering immensely. And so I think for the left, with at least in my experience, what sort of happened is, you know, instead of talking about the corporations, instead of talking about, you know, the particular parts of government, the particular people who wield power, you talk about these really broad configurations, which are basically faceless and nameless, whether it be, you know, whiteness or patriarchy or sexism or even capitalism in another way. I mean, you could have the argument of whether capitalism
They're all
still exists
bugbears,
or,
right?
pardon? Yeah, they're
They're
all
all bugbears.
bugbears
Yeah.
because they don't have faces. And we have to, if we're, I mean, I think to a certain
Yeah.
degree, if we're going to be dealing with politics, we have to
Yeah.
deal with people. We have to deal with people with faces who we can kind of point at and say,
Yeah.
you. And you can't do that with any of these things. And so I think for the left, often it's sort of been going after, you know, say white supremacy has become, which is, of course, in some contexts, a very real thing, but going after that has
Mhm.
become the thing instead of saying, who are the 10 heads of these corporations who we need to be really thinking about? What are the 10 corporations, you know, whose policies we need to be scrutinizing with a fine-tooth comb to figure out what are they really doing? Where is
Yeah.
the money moving? Where is, you know, those sort of things out the window? It's these, yeah, bugbears.
But yeah, that's, I mean, it's the weirdest thing, right? Because you see, you know, the stereotype of the Starbucks Marxist, right? Who talks about revolution while ordering a double mint latte.
Or the tenured Yale professor at the faculty
Yeah.
club. You know,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I hate capitalism. Yeah. On that
yeah,
salary, you can afford to it.
yeah, yeah.
You know?
So if
No,
we
it's
said that that was a tool, you know, that would be, again, the reason we met, Philip, was Guido, but that would be the, you know, the thesis of the ideology of tyranny. Would your point depuis, you know, kind of be, you know, getting a little more granular, would it be something like the 10 big corporations? You know, because the $1 million question again, as you said, it's all faceless. But even this thing, you know, that James W. Douglas, I'm just finishing his second book, Remember when we were
Oh, yeah.
talking about that early on, just JFK's assassination?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Martyr to the now he's got a book, Martyrs to the Unspeakable, that deals with JFK, Malcolm, Martin, and
Oh,
RFK.
wow. Oh,
And
yeah, I didn't know he was,
yeah,
for some reason I thought he had passed away. That's
yeah.
amazing. Oh,
And
that's
even
great.
at the, I think like somewhat recently, he there was a revisitation in a court in the South of like King's assassination, and he and only two other people were the reporters there, right? That struck me as
Wow.
emblematic, but so the word unspeakable, the unspeakable, is useful for thanking him for the work he's
Yes.
done on those.
Yeah.
But you had also mentioned, if we were leftist critics of the left, we might all consider ourselves in some fashion. Whatever
Mm,
happened to the party of dissent,
yeah.
Well,
but would it be going after the 10 big corporations, or what would you say, Philip, about like what would be
well,
an angle?
let me
Or
throw
Michael?
something out
Well, you
there.
go, yeah,
Sure,
go
please.
first, Michael,
Yeah,
please.
Fine.
please. Yeah.
So my doctorate, audience is in early modern English literature, in particular with related to religion and the Reformation and poetry. Well, what happened when I was working on my doctorate and my dissertation in particular? Um, you see that the template for all these revolutions, especially what we've seen in the United States, and maybe with what happened with the left in the United States, is what Henry VIII did. I mean, talk about a heroic project of propaganda and social engineering, where you change the entire nation of England from one of the most stalwart Catholic nations on the face of the earth to Protestant, because at the whim of Henry VIII, right? So what does he replace it with? Catholicism with patriotism. But the way he did it wasn't by appealing to the peasants. The way he did it was by taking land away from the church and giving it to the nobles,
Mm,
because he didn't have any money to pay him off. So he took land away from the no from the church and gave it to the nobles, and he made them. He That's how he worked. That's how you change a society, not by talking to the grassroots, but by talking to the middle managers. And the United States has been doing this. Isn't this what happened in our culture, where those middle managers tend to be from the left? Not all of them, but I'd say the majority. And certainly in colleges and universities, right? And then you can change the culture. I mean, even if we talked about like the trans stuff or gender stuff, that all started in colleges and universities. Deconstruction. I don't hate deconstruction. I really like Jacques Derrida, but you can see that poorly applied principles from whether it's gender studies or deconstruction filter out into the culture in general by a bunch of half-educated college students, and it fucks everything up, and it's disruptive. What he don't even say. Maybe you like it better, but it's certainly disruptive, and that's
mm.
exactly what happened in England during the Reformation. Right? You work on those middle managers, and this is the thesis of Edward Bernays' book Propaganda. He says that's who you go after. You convince the doctors, the teachers, the professors, the lawyers, and then you got everybody.
Yeah. Well, and the thing, the interesting thing now with that is, now it seems like we're getting to the point where we don't need those. Not that we don't. Those people, not only, maybe it's not best to say they're not needed, they can't be afforded anymore. The economy has reached the point where we cannot sustain the pensions, the sort of the promises that we have made to all these middle managers. People are living too long. I mean, from this viewpoint,
Yeah.
they're living too long. They have too many expectations. It's not affordable. And so what's going to happen next is that all of these quote unquote middle managers are going to get destroyed because they just, even if we're just thinking at a purely economic level, they can't, you can't fund them anymore. And I think, also if you look at academia today, the older generations of professors at these top schools, yeah, they did great. The younger ones, they have also been the promises that were made to them about the life they could have going into academia
Mhm.
is not there anymore. I
No.
mean, people I know who got tenure track at Berkeley or similar places, they're never going to buy a house. They're never going to afford a house. Never. not even with any sort of university help. I mean,
Mm.
sure, at Stanford, maybe it might be a little better. But the younger generations who are coming into these sort of these roles that 50 years ago you would be compensated for fulfilling an ideological propagandistic role by some material sort of gain or settlement. That's not there anymore. And you look at like the stock market now and the fact that Nvidia is in all these pension plans. If this bubble blows, which it will at some point, that is going to destroy all of these middle managers who thought that they were valued by and important within the system that they had
Mhm.
helped manufacture consent
Yeah.
for. And I think this is honestly why the push for AI is happening so quickly. Is because before you had the ideology done by these middle managers, we can't fund them anymore. We're almost $40 trillion in debt. Get the AI to do it.
Right.
Create a new system in which
Yeah.
that function that was once held by people can be given over to AI, and
But
then you add the middle managers to
right.
the kind of the I don't know, whatever.
Now, if
That's my
I
yeah.
can't help but think of the last sentence of 1984. Do you guys know what it is?
No, I don't remember.
Winston loved Big Brother.
Oh, after all that, he returned. He
Yes.
returned. He returned
I'm
to
wondering with these middle managers,
yeah.
are they still going to love Big Brother when it all blows up?
Maybe what? That's a really good point. That probably
They
I
probably
think
won't.
that's brilliant. I don't. I mean, I would be certain that there'd be a number of them who would turn into real dissidents. They'd become, they'd say, but I think that's a brilliant question because if the majority of them did not love Big Brother, then you'd have then you'd really have the possibility for an army, kind of bringing together the disenfranchised, disillusioned, among the working class, among people who've already been disenfranchised, and the newly disenfranchised middle managers, ideology keepers. But if they are somehow convinced, either whether probably by fear, as in Winston, I don't, to
Well,
still
torture.
love
It's
Big Brother,
torture and
yeah,
manipulation. Yeah.
and maybe
Well, yeah, they got him
maybe
to
they'll be
betray
tortured,
his
but
love. They got him to betray who he was. This is the very foundation
yeah,
by denying his love for Julia. You
Hmm.
know,
mm,
that's how they just said you're going to say the thing. It breaks you. It
Two
breaks
plus
you.
two is five. Yeah.
Yeah. But
yeah.
then, so let's go back to then the evil. So what you're portraying here, Philip and Michael, and I'm totally with, is um, let's use the scenario of getting those middle managers that they're gonna just eat cardboard and like it. Um,
That's
Eat the
right.
it's
bugs.
not it's not the
And we
question of
liked
who.
it.
How are you? One of the themes some of our listeners will remember is kind of a new walk with faith, Christian faith in your life. So you're bringing up evil. Um, what happens when they want to? It's a they. I'm trying to think of how to frame it. They want to despoil even their barons. If Michael was saying they're despoiling them, um, is it because Thorstein Veblen said like some people just like to put their boot on somebody else's face and keep grinding it in? What's your best metaphor? What is your best way for somebody to get a handle on the end stages of this? You could see, I remember the movie There Will Be Blood, Daniel
Yeah.
Day-Lewis. They bring you to the point you go step by step where he has no problems killing his son over the basic idea of like more of this thing, disordered love, we might call it. So you're an anthropologist, kind of a Christian. How are, give me some language that you're using for yourself right now, or maybe paint a picture.
I mean, it seems like it's a very hard question because it so much seems to depend on where you take your starting point or sort of what your well maybe even just one are you choosing to sort of um, think from and within a secular standpoint, thinking of the kinds of motivations that we assign to people and imagine if we are kind of putting, I think Bruno Latour has this phrase, maybe he borrowed it from someone else, putting God off sides, kind of, or are we including within our thinking the not necessarily just God, but the existence and operativity of other additional forces than the ones that would be in the psychologist handbook, the DSM, or whatever it's called.
By
And
yoga.
I think depending on which of those starting points you choose, I think you get to different answers. I think we know, you look at Silicon Valley, for instance, and the sort of the in-house philosophy that a lot of them seem to have adhered to in various ways. Ideas of transhumanism.
Hmm.
So many of these ideas are deeply esoteric ones. You could say they're
Mhm.
religious too,
Oh
but
yeah.
they're certainly not purely secular in the old-fashioned sense. I mean, there are many in Silicon Valley who have been fairly open in talking about AI as a demon, as we're
Yeah.
summoning something. We're bringing something into human history that is going to change the evolution of the race, in the broadest sense. If we take those sort of statements seriously, then I think our analyses of where we're potentially going have to, at the very least, be open to certain ideas or possibilities that would rub a lot of the current middle managers in academia, whatever, very much the wrong way.
Mhm.
Because if we say, well, they just want they want power, they want more and more power. The desire for power and wealth is endless and infinite. I'm
Hmm.
sure it is. Um, but I don't know if that's descriptive enough to describe what's going on and the sort of tectonic shifts that seem to be occurring to just make these appeals to, you know, people who get power want more power. People who get wealth want more wealth, and that cycle is infinite, and it will get to the point where you'll kill your son for more, for more oil, for more wealth. Maybe it's that simple, but somehow I feel like that is to remain within that register is to mean that we're not going to understand what's going
That's right. All animals are equal. Some are more equal than others, right?
on. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yeah. All humans are greedy, power hungry bastards, but some.
I'm on a George Orwell kick today, boys. But you mentioned transhumanism, and I think I mentioned this before. 20 years ago, no, 21 years, some long time ago, I published an article, my first time I published an academic article on Blade Runner and transhumanism.
Mm.
And I used to talk about it to my students back in those days. And they're like, Dr. Martin, this is never going to happen. I'm like, yes, it is. I said, but by the time you're my age, it'll probably be a normal thing. Just like
Yeah.
I used to also starting about the same time. There's this article out there, after birth abortion, should the baby live? You know that one?
Mm.
I know the
Mm.
concept.
And it's short, and I used to use it in teaching forever because students can read it in about 20 minutes. You can make them read it in class. And what happened in that afterbirth abortion article, which is also part of transhumanism,
Mm.
cull the flock, right? Cull the herd.
Yeah.
That, and it's diabolical. But when I first assigned it, say in 2005 or 2010, and I would
Mm.
watch the students while they're reading it, their eyes would get huge, like, "Oh my God, what's he making us read? This is diabolical." But then when I stopped, right before I stopped teaching, I would also assign that, and I'd watch them, and they're like, "Yeah, fine, I'm fine." They were fine with it.
Mhm.
They were fine with it. And
Yeah.
that was the product of, say, 15 years of constant messaging.
And they wouldn't be
A
fine
lot
with
of
it if
their
they were there.
schools.
They
Pardon me?
wouldn't be fine with it if they were in the room. I mean, that's the
No.
thing. If they were in the
Right.
room and they saw, the after live infant,
Well, it's not
they
just
would
in the
not be okay
room.
with it.
I
Yeah.
mean, the,
Yeah.
the, the thesis in afterbirth abortion that uh, it's legitimate to kill a child up until the child has preferences, meaning up to like 2 years old or more, right?
Well, and potentially never, given the fact
Never,
that,
yeah,
so many of us are programmed to sort of have our preferences kind of not be our
right,
own
yeah,
anyway.
yeah. What do you want for
And
dinner? I
maybe
don't
that's
know.
the theory. Maybe that's the theory of this sort of idea of population control as well. Most people aren't really human because we've sort of programmed them, and so,
That's right, and that's what they're
we can
saying
turn
is
them
you're not
off.
really human until you can have
Yeah.
preferences. So it's
Yeah,
it's legitimate to kill somebody.
yeah, yeah.
And once a person doesn't have preferences, say an Alzheimer's patient or something, it's there's and this is all comes right out of Peter Singer talking about devil.
Really?
Oh yeah, this is Peter Singer's
Oh,
baby. No pun
I've never read
intended.
him.
Pardon me?
I always heard about, wasn't, I mean, the way he's presented, isn't it, is like the animal rights guy or something?
Yeah, he's pro calling the human population.
Oh, yeah,
He's
okay, he's
horrible.
one of those.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
humans
Yeah,
animals have more rights than humans do, as far as he's
yeah,
concerned. Oh, he's
yeah.
he's dreadful. Yeah.
Mm, I didn't know that.
Fucking
I'd
awful.
never read him.
Yeah, it's scary. You read him, it's scary. You're like,
Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
My office is the department in the diocese that's fighting in New York, this medical aid in dying. What it is,
Mm,
physician assisted suicide. But the more you get into that, the more you realize how dark it is. Now, I have to
Oh, yeah.
verify these, but I think in Canada, it's already gone. At least this is what I believe
Let
people
me
are
see. I'm
telling
gonna
me.
look
It's
it up.
already gone to the number one cause of death. And
Yes.
you're dealing with people who are setting up, their dates. I'm going to choose December 17th. There's going to be a lot of people around me. To wade into that water a little bit is to wade into. So physician-assisted suicide has been the darkest thing I've discovered in the last year or
Hmm.
so.
mm.
Mhm.
Isn't it very
Actually,
prevalent in
I
Canada
used to
too?
see Jack Kevorkian at the health food store when I was a young
Oh,
man.
really? Yeah, he's a
He was
Michigander.
from Royal Oak, Michigan.
Yeah. What were you saying, Philip?
Oh, wasn't it in Canada that they have a new law that, allows people to, they call it, medically assisted death or
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
suicide or something. And now in 2023, it was like 5% of all the deaths in Canada were people who elected to kill themselves.
Yeah, I heard it was more than that, but that's what I was talking about
Maybe
in
it was more.
Canada. Yeah,
Maybe
yeah,
it was more than
yeah.
five. But
Um,
but
Crazy, crazy,
yeah.
crazy.
Well, and
Yeah.
I'm the this might be, think about, Winston Love Big Brother, the narratives around climate change, and the fact that human beings, or certain human beings,
Mhm.
are carrying out policies that are doing just, untold immense harm to the planet and to, ecology is undeniable. But it seems totally plausible that what's going to happen is that climate change narratives of certain kinds are going to be ramped up, to encourage this narrative that we really need fewer people, and that it is, encouraging, or one way or the other, a culling of the
Uh-huh.
herd is a moral good. Um,
This
uh,
is so dark, and I'm laughing. But I'm
Happy
gonna ask is
Thanksgiving.
Michael. Yeah, no, but what is but to and I think we want to come back to some of this, but it was after this, so Philip again, what do you think about when you think of resistance? We've talked a little bit about, we can talk about the economy, but I guess, and I never want to put somebody on a spot that I wouldn't be put myself. The what we're talking about is kind of an anti-natalist worldview in part, and I still think part of our, Christian walk is, to be open to childbirth. But I think too that we have to, if I use the bubbling cauldron image from Welsh, specifically for John Cooper Powys, it seems to me that at a time like this, the phrase again would be, in one sense, when the sea is receding, it's breaking on other shores. I invoke Michael in a sense that if we're dealing with something that could be where the little places share the grand designs, could be a little bit astrological, the motion, repeating some stuff that we've brought up over the last year, some of that work with the outer planets. I guess, and I'm only speaking for myself, is that I think there's some themes we're given kind of in Revelation, about not so much the book of Revelation, but in scripture, in the whatever the phenomenon of Jesus was, in the sacraments. But a community of a human scale. I don't see it as an option like maybe Rod Dreher does, pulling out with kind of a dramatic us and them. But how are you? I could go into more mind, but when you think of this going on, what image are you using? Like survival times? I guess I'm saying I think when something's receding, there's other themes that are pressing up. from the bottom up. The underworld is the theme that's pressing up in our time. We call it the mental health crisis. But there's going to be great lessons, great strengths that come through when we can kind of come to terms with who we are in that darkness piece. And so I like this idea of working with things that I assume to be pushing forward in this time. How do you begin to enter in that question with like your sense of the darkness that surrounds us?
Um, well, I think my view might be somewhat changing, because I think when I first really started to think about these things more, it's really overwhelming. It's really, it's really horrifying. I mean, it's really, I mean, it's horrifying, both because you become more aware of it, but two, it's very difficult if almost no one around you recognizes it in the same way, because then you have the twofold fact that, my God, what is happening? And am I crazy, or is everyone around me crazy? And both of those things are not crazy, but have I lost my mind, or has everyone else had world totally pulled over their eyes? Which is more frightening? So I think it's very easy to become despondent. It's very easy to sort of become very, very seeing the darkness, to allow some of that darkness to come into you, even if your goal is to oppose it, or fight it, or resist it, or whatever. So I think that is a very kind of important danger here. But I wonder increasingly, and this is maybe somewhat kind of, I don't know, provocative or silly or something. I've generally tried to think about what are the practical solutions to this. How do we resist this in this, that, or the other way? What if one potential kind of pathway is we all need to try to become saints? We all need to, I mean, maybe that, is more important than resisting. Maybe we need to expunge every last little bit of anger within ourselves. Maybe we need to really cultivate, as like a real urgency, not just for ourselves, but more broadly, that like we cannot be satisfied with being good enough, sort of in, people. We need to really be all aspiring to sainthood in a pretty rapid pace, because otherwise, I think of, in the, with Sodom and Gomorrah, find 50 people, no, find 10, and then I won't destroy it.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we need 50 people. I mean,
We need a minion.
I mean, we need we need a million. We need enough people who really have expunged all of that darkness out of themselves to the greatest capacity. And maybe that's, again, I'm being somewhat, provocative, but I don't know. Is that actually more of an important but also practical thing for us to be doing than figuring out, how do I, sabotage the, the AI takeover? Is that what I should be doing, or should I be focused relentlessly on ensuring that, there are, I do not have thoughts of, anger or frustration, um, or reduce those to the absolute minimum. Should I be, reading, spiritual exercises, as much as possible to try to, discharge from myself all the negativity which exists, around. So those seem like two paths. Maybe, hopefully, they're reconcilable. That you can both sort of try to say, I need to make myself a better person to try to make the world a better person, while also taking on.
I can make the theme at least for Illich, that it's a book I was just hanging up when I was in the UP. I bought. I've never had one of those flags, but it's a cool one of like Sasquatch, like peacing out, like from the woods or something. I just kind of liked it.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of Sasquatch stuff in Michigan.
Yeah, but it was when I was hanging it up on my bookshelves, and I see it through my. We've got visitors, so I've got a different background. One of the books I had to use to put on top of the flag, I was just kind of unfurling inside, was a masterpiece by a Jesuit theologian. His name is Gerhard Ladner, but it was one of Ivan Illich's favorite books, and it was part one of what wanted to be a huge project, the history of the idea of reform. And again, the church can institutionalize itself too much. When we talk about the kingdom of God, it's just it's at the end, but also something breaking in. Well, I don't know. For the last 1,000 years, we put it mostly at the end, the theme of
Yeah.
where it's breaking in. But the other one is in this book, the history of the idea of reform. Illich and Wiladner, they're going out of their way through a magisterial use of the church fathers. And people can Google that book. But what you get is that the distinctly Christian, as opposed to a return to a golden age or a utopian future, the Christian thing, now again, we have to put this with the paradox of community. But we reform the world exactly to your point, Philip. We reform the world to the degree we work at reforming ourselves. And the way it seems to me that can get perverted, the worst that being the corruption of the best, is this kind of puritanical moral codism, right? But where you were talking about forgiveness, I think we have a real prophet in William Blake. When he boils it down, he takes the 10 Commandments and he flips them out. He says, he can prove that Jesus broke every commandment, folks. And then he kind of flips everything inside out. But he's describing the revelation to us as like an orgy of forgiveness. I forgive you, you forgive me. This is the bread. This is the cup. So I think our great prophets, and again, analogous to the idea that the church during this middle period, I don't think it's bad for me. I'm allowing my own children, to think in terms of a 3-stage cycle. Joachim Fiore, Dante, people, he's misunderstood. But it doesn't mean we have to get superstitious about an age of the Father, an age of the Son, and an age of the Holy Spirit. But it's certainly a fructifying way to think. We don't need to associate, what the church did with Joachim Fiore. They thought he was predicting, his followers, many of them did, the death of the institutional church. So they, of course, had to do their job and make him blacklisted. But something of this theme of, reforming ourselves to the degree, and again, it's not a moral codism, but it's like what you're saying. We have to root out that hatred in us. We have to go in there and just root it out. Michael? Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Well, lately I've been thinking about similar topics. I did a video the other day and it's on my Substack on the divine masculine and trauma, because it's something I think about a lot. And what happened, I did a couple of videos on Sophia and whatever, and people said, "What about the divine masculine?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's a good point." And so I had to think my way through it, and I'm still thinking my way through it, but more and more, and this is probably from my old guy vantage point, I wonder, having gone through so many iterations of the Christian imagination in my lifetime, that the iteration I'm at now, and actually this is actually, you mentioned the Book of Revelation, and I've been still working on preparing my head for this essay I have to write over the holidays, that I'm supposed to give in the Czech Republic next year. So I reread, because I couldn't find it. I had to buy a new copy of Vladimir Solovyev's Three Meetings, which has the short story of the Antichrist at the end. And I actually read right here, The Sophiology of Death by Bulgakov, which I had avoided reading. I don't know why. Which is okay.
I
Not as
didn't
great.
even know that book existed. Okay.
Oh yeah, it just came out a couple years ago.
Huh.
And also thinking about, well, when I'm thinking about the Book of Revelation, actually, in one of the videos, I mentioned how the Book of Revelation actually influenced the Hindu idea of the Kalki avatar, who's who rides a white horse and comes at the end of the world I think who comes to destroy all those who have dressed themselves as kings, who have dared to dress themselves as kings in this age of darkness. I love that. I love that thought and that image, because it's really what we're talking about, the people who have dressed themselves as kings in this age of darkness. And what do? Right? And of course, in Hinduism and in Christianity, and another great example for Hindu scriptures is the Bhagavad Gita, right? Which takes the place on a battlefield where what's his name? I can't remember his name right now. What?
Lord Krishna.
No, the other one. The son of Pandu. Can't remember his name. But he's there and he's weeping because he has to go fight, and on the other side is part of his clan, right? His kin are on both sides of the war, like the Civil War, right? And he's weeping, and Krishna is his chariot driver and says, um, he talks about duty, what you were born here to do, which is an interesting notion. And of course, in the Book of Revelation, um, you have two images of Sophia. You have the pregnant woman in the wilderness, right? Who the dragon pursues. I mean, it's like that is the archetypal image of our time right now, of the dragon pursuing the woman. Because that's, if you ask me, so much of what is going on in the culture right now is the attack on the woman, on the divine feminine and the biological feminine, right?
I agree.
You talking about transhumanism, it's kind of gone under the radar, but it's still out there, this development of the artificial womb, right? So if you have an artificial womb, and I just saw this morning a man won strongest woman in the world contest the other day, you have that happen. Who needs women? Right? We can do it on our own. It goes back to Brave New World, right? Where they're all born into, they're all test tube babies. Um, but and so you have that on one side of the Book of Revelation, and the other Sophianic image is of the woman clothed with the sun, right? And that's the two, not, I wouldn't call them polarities, but the two manifestations of the Sophianic in the Book of Revelation, right? And I think, I'm not saying we're at the end of the world, but I think we're always already at the end of the book of Revelation, the
Yeah.
apocalypse.
And it's
And
probably, I
I
mean,
think
it's,
that's the moment we're at right now. And I think you were mentioning astrology earlier, Mike, and I do think that and I told people this, a long time ago, that between late summer this year and first few months of next year, it's going to be nuts and chaotic. And nobody can figure out what the hell is going on in the world, right? It's just head spinning. You can't even keep up. But so my thought is, um, and of course, thinking about Saint Michael and the Dragon, Book of Revelation, I've thought and about uh, Krishna and Arjuna. That's what Arjuna is, the one of the
Mhm.
chariot. And the Kalki avatar. I'm also thinking about, and I think this connects to both what Philip's talking about, sainthood, and what you're talking about, Mike, is the chivalric code, right? And for me, the chivalric code is embodied in Psalm 82, right? Like where defend the poor and fatherless, do justice to the afflicted and needy, deliver the poor and needy, rid them out of the hand of the wicked. They know not, neither will they understand. All the foundations are out of course. They walk on in darkness, right? That's right before he's, I have said, ye are gods, and all of you are children of the Most High, right? Now, I think we're always already in that place right there. And that's not, and that takes, whether it's, it takes some kind of valor to do that, because it takes some kind of valor to become a saint.
and it has to be a value that does not, is not pursuing your own
Right.
self-glorification.
And that's the chivalric code. Of course, if you read the Mort d'Arthur, it doesn't always work out, right?
Yeah.
But that's the code. That's the ideal, right?
Well, and unfortunately too, it seems like when you get sort of images of the chivalric today, in popular culture or media, it's placed in a very particular aesthetic register, of, oh, that looks, not sort of missing the point of what valor means, of
I know.
wanting to be valorous because that would I would like the kind of person I would be if I were like that.
Right.
That
We're
is
all
sort
just
of an
thinking of
ego
like
ideal. That's my ego ideal for myself.
cosplay.
Cosplay. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, cosplay, and but and it could be very sincere. Like, well, I really want to be chivalric, good person because that's the kind of person I want to be. Whereas obviously, what we need to do is to want to do that
Interesting.
irrespective of that being an ego ideal for ourselves. We want to
Right.
do that because we want to do the things it entails, not
True.
because we want to become the kind of person who does those
Mhm,
things.
mhm.
And it seems like very, as always, difficult
Yeah.
for us to.
Hey, have you
And
guys ever seen the movie, the French film? The English title is The War of the Buttons.
I
No.
have, but I'm
You
trying to
have.
remember it.
Now
It's
in there,
old. That goes
what
back to the 80s, I think, doesn't it?
maybe not that long ago, but
Okay.
it's been a while. What I love in that film, it takes place during World War II, and there's these kids who have like, like what I did when I was a kid. The groups of kids that, like have wars against these other kids in the other town, right? So they're throwing rocks and doing whatever, right? And it's all play, but it's in the context of World War II. And
Mm,
interestingly, in that film, there's a kind of two examples, and I think they point to what we've been talking about today. So, and I was thinking about it earlier. So, the one example of manhood is this sniveling loser who's part of Vichy France, who's selling out the French to the Nazis, and he kind of dresses like Hitler a little bit, doing a little Hitler cosplay, got the mustache going on. And there's this other side of it, which is this farmer who is this one kid's father, and the kid is like the head of the one of the teams in the War of the Buttons. What they do is they take the buttons off their pants when they capture the other kids, right?
Mhm.
mm.
And but the one kid who's like the big tough guy, he's disgusted by his old man, who's this farmer who doesn't do anything. And then he overhears his father and some other guys after he had gone to bed talking. They were part of the resistance, and he had no idea his dad was part of the resistance, right?
Mhm.
So there's a couple, two examples of, you could say, the masculine. One corrupted and artificial and evil ultimately, where the other one is good. You're like, which is kind of an interesting and I think but I think the problem in our day and age, right, is it's so easy because I think of social media and other things and to turn oneself into a brand or an avatar or doing cosplay, right? This is very Heideggerian. I mean, how do you find the authenticity in a milieu like this? But I think you can find it.
Yeah, because what we would hope that the seed of it is in us always, so that it's always available if we could locate it. I mean,
Convinced too that this stage, and I want to hear you, Philip, is that when we were all smirking when we talked about the new chivalric, I'm just picturing again cosplay and everything and confusing means and ends, but it's going to need humor. That's one of the themes coming
yeah,
out. That's why Don Quixote, Rabelais were the
yeah,
the
yeah.
writers of the fifth gospel. It's that it's going to need this kind of um again, I'm gonna that quote from Powys that means so much to me. All humor is based on the non-recognition of the equality of all souls. These people who think they're better than us. But this
Right.
leveling type of humor we know is part of this. You were saying, Philip?
Yeah. Oh well, no. Well, I actually no. Let me. Unfortunately, I have to run in a minute. But
Yeah,
let me because I think
sure.
that's yeah. That no. I mean, well, two images that come to mind. One, because I'm answering this, but one going back to the astrological. Somewhere recently, I saw an old picture, kind of a painting of maybe this is a common idea in astrology, but a little child gathering flowers as the planets spin around. And I think that the symbolism was supposed to be the one who becomes as a little child in their soul is no longer subject to the movement of the planets.
Great.
You know,
Mhm.
that kind of determinism can be superseded or transcended by a state of the soul.
That's beautiful.
And so, in another way, I was thinking, thinking about the evil of the world now, the attitude that I would want to have, which I don't, is to be able to kind of have two things simultaneously. One thing, this is evil and it must be challenged, but I'm also not going to take it too seriously
That's
in
Charlie
a certain way.
Chaplin, though. That's exactly
Which,
I
well,
think.
okay,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah,
that I'm
yeah.
going to, you might be, maybe, deep under Silicon Valley, the
Yeah.
devil is, making fun, but I, I should not treat him with too much reverence. I should not be too reverential to the evil that I feel like I see, because if
Yeah.
I am, then I start to get really dark inside myself, and
Mhm.
then what's the point? Then I'm dark, the world's dark, so I realized that I think I would have to be kind of like that little child gathering flowers, while at the same time saying, no, this is really evil and we need to do something about it.
Yeah, yeah.
But I'm not going to, I, I'm not going to take it more seriously than it should be. I'm going to have, yeah,
No,
some
I think
element of a
that's
comic.
I do think that's prophetic, and I do think that's been laid out for us by the great
Mm,
prophets, you know. And
yeah.
again, Charlie Chaplin is being more significant to me than Franz Jagerstadt, you know, in a sense of the leveling humor more than maybe
Mm,
just the quiet is super important too. But that's why Tim Dillon, you know, if I see hope in a young generation, some of these podcasters are also
yeah,
very
yeah,
funny, leveling
yeah,
humor as opposed
yeah,
to the broadsides. Otherwise, we take ourselves too seriously. You know, that even on
yeah,
this podcast, we're trying to connect the dots, but I'm so glad you ended with that.
yeah,
Michael, and
yeah.
thank you so much for being on. Michael, you had some concluding thoughts. You were looking at your book.
I was looking up the chivalric code if I could
Yeah.
find them,
Mm,
which is you. I think this is if you could apply this, it would work for anybody, right?
Mhm.
Bravery, courage in battle and facing challenges head on. Honor, maintaining one's reputation, integrity, loyalty, faithfulness to one's lord, comrades, and commitments. Courtesy, polite behavior, especially towards women and the less fortunate. Generosity, willingness to help those in need and share resources. Justice, fair treatment of others and upholding the law. And piety,
Yeah.
devotion to God and the Christian faith.
Yeah.
That I
I'd
don't
ra-
think you can go wrong with that
yeah.
list.
I'd rather have him learn it
mm.
from Don Quixote than probably some of the homeschooling lessons about
Well, no, but
chivalry that
I told
Catholic
you, I don't
kids
know how
have.
many times, Mike. I mean, to me, and I'm actually sitting in the deer blind yesterday. I thought maybe I should write a book about the divine masculine because the older I get, the more important the story of Parsifal and the Morte d'Arthur are to me because
Sure,
I
sure,
think
sure.
they're so
Mhm.
Mm,
applicable to our situation, to
Mhm.
the to
Mhm.
the historical moment.
Yeah.
mm.
Yeah. We'll do one. We'll do a podcast on that soon. Philip, Father, happy Thanksgiving to
Thank
you
you.
and the family. Michael, the same.
You
As you
too.
were saying, you had to run, Philip. We have visited my dad. We had other kids, and my daughter arrived with her husband. She's expecting, and they arrived
Nice.
during this podcast.
Oh,
So,
congratulations.
yeah,
That's
Good for
wonderful.
you.
this time together partakes of some of that wonderful vibration. Yep.
All right, go
Oh,
do
All
that's
right.
that.
great.
God bless.
Happy,
Good to
God
see
bless
God
you.
bless.
everybody.
Happy
All right.
Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Take
Take
care.
care now. Yeah. Bye.
Bye.